Hey everybody, I'm Katallina, and today I'm here to talk about my top 5 shows for spring 2024. Two things before we get started. First up, this is my list. This is purely my opinion. This is not about what is technically best or what is considered best by polls or anything. This is purely me. I would love to know what you guys have enjoyed this season, so feel free to comment that below. I wanted to make sure that was clear. The other thing I want to make sure is clear is that I didn't watch every show that came out during spring, so if your favorite isn't here, it doesn't necessarily mean that I thought it was good or bad. It's actually just as likely that I didn't watch it. Either way, it's the internet, so of course I have to put these caveats out, but that's enough of that nonsense. Let's get into the list proper, starting with number 5, which is Konosuba Season 3. I really enjoyed the 3rd season of Konosuba, but before I get into what I thought made it specifically great, there is every possibility that somebody here has not heard of Konosuba or has no idea what it is, so let's break that down quickly. Konosuba is the story of a guy named Kazuma, and Kazuma is a teenager who likes to play video games in his bedroom and pretty much just stay there as much as he can. One day, though, he decides he's going to go out and get a copy of the newest, latest, and greatest MMO, but on his way there, he realizes that a classmate is in danger of being run over by a tractor trailer, and he runs into the road to try and save her. He dies. But when he gets to the area where you go when you die in this universe, he finds out that nothing is as it seemed. The transport that he thought he got smucked by was actually a tractor. The girl was never in danger, and Kazuma died of a heart attack. And everybody, both the goddess he is speaking to in this new world, and everyone who supposedly loved him in the old world, is laughing their ass off at him. So of course, Kazuma is not happy. The good news is that Kazuma finds out that he will be able to reincarnate into a new world, and that he gets to pick a magical item, and he gets to go on a quest to potentially defeat a demon lord. But as he goes through this process and tries to decide what he wants, the goddess who is guiding him through this process continues to become more and more impatient. And between her insulting him prior and her impatience here, Kazuma makes a decision. Forget all of the fancy artifacts. I'ma bring you, baby! And in 3, 2, 1, the goddess is in the capsule with him, and they are teleported to their new life. From there, we get to the actual story proper, where he, Kazuma, the goddess Aqua, and their 2 party members that they meet along the way, Megumin the mage and Darkness the crusader, go on a series of crazy and wacky adventures. So that's the gist of Konosuba. As for Season 3 sees us at a point where Kazuma is not sure he wants to adventure anymore. He has dealt with a trauma situation from the movie that precedes this season, and he thinks he might want to actually retire and become a monk. And the story just goes from there. This season has a whole bunch of crazy stuff that goes on. There are some really awesome things that happen in Season 3 of Konosuba. We get some really wonderful character progression for Darkness. We get some really interesting and heartfelt moments with Megumin. We get some absolute comedy gold from Aqua, as well as a couple moments where she literally saves our ass. And we get Kazuma attempting everything from trying to stop a wedding to actually, as I said, getting kidnapped by a princess. It's great. There is so much here that is good. There is a battle with a Hydra. There's something for everybody. I don't want to actually go into how anything turns out, of course, but there's lots to be watched, and it's definitely worth your time. If you like comedy, fantasy, and isekai, and you can handle a bit of lewd comedy, let me make that part really clear. Because if you don't like lewd comedy, if it upsets you, if it pisses you off, if it just isn't funny to you, this might not work for you. But if you like that, and if you like comedy and satire and parody of like fantasy tropes and isekai and stuff like that, you absolutely owe it to yourself to try out Konosuba. Start at the beginning if you're new, and if you are coming back, have no fear. Season 3 is absolutely fantastic and is 100% worth your time. I am giving Season 3 of Konosuba 4 out of 5 flowers. Coming in at number 4, we have Windbreaker. Windbreaker is the story of a young man named Sakura who actually goes to this town because he wants to attend this high school called Fearin High. And the reason he wants to attend this high school isn't because it's got an amazing computer studies program, isn't because it has an arts specialization, isn't because it has some kind of math specialty. Oh no, 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 not for our dear Sakura. He wants to attend this school because this school is a badass school that is full of people who fight super freaking hard, and he wants to climb to the top and be number one. What he doesn't understand at the start of the story is that the key thing about this school is that everyone in it works together to try and protect their town, because this town and this location is in this area where there are lots of thugs and gangs and general violence and bad behavior, to the point where these students came together and decided, screw you, we're sick of you bothering the people in our town, and if you come here, you're going to treat the people here with respect. And they decided to become the town's guardians. Sakura obviously has to deal with the reality that things aren't quite the way that he envisioned them, and he has to figure out how he is going to navigate his new life in this space. The interesting thing about Windbreaker is that the first season actually majorly takes place only over a few days. It's a very tightly knit timeline for a story, and they do a really good job despite that of actually really letting you get into the headspace of the different characters, whether it's Sakura, whether it's the other guys who are part of Fearin High School, or whether it is the guys that they fight against. It does a great job of highlighting both the heroes and the antagonists that are going on at any given time, whether it is a true conflict or simply some kind of challenge going down. The other really amazing thing about Windbreaker is the reality that Windbreaker has both absolutely incredibly amazing visual effects for its hand-to-hand combat, with each character having a unique fighting style and standing out distinctly when it is their time in the spotlight, as well as actually having these incredibly in-depth and interesting backstories for each character, so that when two people are duking it out, you actually give a crap about what happens to each of them, which in a story like this is something that can so often be overlooked. It may or may not work for every viewer. I know I've seen some people who really like that aspect of the story, and some people who wish they would just shut up and get to the fights, like they want to see MMA or something. But personally, I really liked this balance of characterization and combat put together. I thought that was really smart, and it kept me very interested and very glued to my seat as I've watched each episode, whether the episode is a more direct and action-y fight episode, or whether it slows down to give us more character detail. Overall though, the only regret that I have about watching Windbreaker is that I didn't actually cover it as a discussion piece on my channel. So sadly, the only other thing I have on here about Windbreaker is in one of my The Week That Was segments. That said, Windbreaker is an absolutely fantastic show that I would highly recommend to people who like great fights and interesting characterization, and I am giving Windbreaker 4 out of 5 flowers. Coming in at number 3 and making a massive departure from everything else that's on my list is the contemporary romance shoujo series, A Condition Called Love. This is the story of a young man named Hananoi and a young woman named Hotaru who are in the same school, who are in separate homeroom classes, and who don't really have any interaction with each other normally, until one day, Hotaru sees that Hananoi is being brutally dumped by somebody at a cafe. They pour liquid on him. She finds him sitting outside, shivering, and she covers him with her umbrella to block him from the wind. Hananoi is deeply moved by this act by Hotaru, and the next day he actually goes to her homeroom class and he asks her to become his girlfriend. Hotaru doesn't really know a great deal about dating or romance or any of that kind of thing, and she's not really sure how she feels about it, so initially she turns him down. But after giving it some consideration, she ultimately decides that she should go ahead and maybe give this a try with Hananoi to see whether or not it could possibly work out. And so our journey begins. I think one of the things that I like most about A Condition Called Love is the reality that this is actually a series about two people who have just gotten together and the experiences and challenges that they face actually being a couple. as opposed to what we see in most shows, where the entirety of a show is often spent asking the question, will they or won't they get together? It isn't nearly as common to see a story where we find out, okay, now that they're together, what will actually happen? So I really enjoyed that part of it. Another thing that I think is really cool about A Condition Called Love, and something I was very nervous about when I first heard of it and thought about watching it and started it, is I was very worried about whether or not it would lean all the way toward supporting Hotaru and her situations, or all the way to the other direction and supporting Hananoi in his situations, because Hotaru is much more modern, is much more realist, and is much more practical, whereas Hananoi is much more idealistic, much more romantic, and much more passionate. He's somebody who believes in the idea of a soulmate. So seeing these two people who come from these very different backgrounds and who have these very different ideas about what love is or should be, I was concerned that we might see favoritism toward one or the other. And another thing that really impressed me about A Condition Called Love is that it never really does that. It focuses on the idea that these two people are actually very different, especially in this regard, and that if they want to actually have a proper relationship and be together, that both of them are going to need to make small and subtle changes over a long stretch of time in order to actually be together and have something meaningful and worthwhile. And it's really good that they don't actually push in one way or the other in that regard. Now, the biggest concern I could see someone potentially having with A Condition Called Love, outside of being a member of my fan base and actually probably mostly liking like fantasy and isekai and stuff, and possibly being bored, which I can understand this isn't going to be for everybody. These kind of sweet shoujo things are something I enjoy, but they're definitely not the main wheelhouse for my YouTube channel. But getting back to the more serious issue, is the idea that some people do actually feel uncomfortable with the behavior and mannerisms of the character of Hananoi. Some girls and guys just don't like him, and it can be really strong. That's probably because people are so independent-minded these days, and the idea of a character behaving in some of the ways that he behaves probably gives people a major ick. And I mean, that's their business and their prerogative. He can be somebody who can be clingy, he can be overly emotional, he can come across as strange or weird or possessive at times. Fortunately, what I noticed personally as I watched the show is that he often thinks those things, and then he often thinks them through and doesn't actually do anything that would cause me to have any serious alarm bells. I also think it's important to note the reality that as this is a pure contemporary romance shoujo, we don't really have a structure other than the romance in the plot line of this, which means that the characters and their characterization are doing double duty. They are character and they are plot. So without having certain forms of conflicting issues going on with the characters, there wouldn't be a plot, and I don't know how you'd actually tell this story. I don't think there'd be anything there. In order to have a story, you have to have some kind of conflict, whether that's internal or external. So I don't quite get where people are going with that particular complaint. The more core aspects of Hananoi that are messed up early in the series, if we saw them in real life, I could understand somebody having some alarm bells. But this is fiction, and as far as I'm concerned, I think they did a lovely job. Anyway, I really enjoyed this. It was definitely way better than I thought it was going to be, and it definitely assuaged any of my concerns or fears. I am happy to report that I am going to be giving A Condition Called Love 4 out of 5 flowers and one of my highest recommendations. Coming in at number 2, we have Remonster. Oh, Remonster, how I miss you already, and the season just ended last week. This has been the highlight of my Mondays and something I've been super looking forward to each week. This is a show where I was a bit cautious going in, but it definitely assuaged my major fears, and it did a really great job of telling a very interesting story. So, for anyone who doesn't know what Remonster is, basically, there is this dude, and he is a human, he is living his life. He's kind of in a futuristic Earth kind of deal, and he dies. He's murdered, actually. and then he is reincarnated as the goblin Gobro. And this is Gobro's story from his birth up until about 4 months of his life. And it is basically told like a journal with visuals and pictures, interactions and characterizations. And it's just about how he and his family of goblins and other creatures that end up joining them grow and progress, and it's absolutely wonderful. It has adventure, it has action, it has romance, it has comedy, it has conflicts, it has everything you could possibly want from a good quality fantasy isekai story. And it's from a monster point of view. One of the most interesting things about Remonster, in my opinion, is the reality that in Remonster, it isn't always the case that the human way of doing things or the monster way of doing things is always and automatically better. Gobro actually is able to take a look at how both of those things are functioning within him and is able to make decisions about how he wants to do things and how he wants to guide his people as he becomes more of a leader, based off of different aspects of what he remembers from his past and what he's experiencing in his present. There's also a great balance between very serious consequences and heavy conflict versus situations that are absolutely wacky and humorous and just laugh out loud funny. And the idea that we have a central character in Gobro who is the pillar of the story and who is able to carry the centerpiece, while we have other characters circling around him and in a very large and memorable cast with some of the most interesting costumes of anything I've seen this season, is absolutely wonderful. The only major downside that I would actually have to warn anyone about with regard to Remonster is that there are some situations of a sexual nature, some of which might seem just cringy to people. That's more so like episode 3 or stuff like that, or a couple that are ethically questionable. I think they might have been more so in the Japanese and weren't quite as much in the English, because I watched the English version when I watched this show, but I've heard some people talk about the Japanese and they seem more upset. So maybe it is a translation thing, I'm not sure. But I know that in episode 5 there is an implied idea that he sleeps with the elves to get them to let him put earrings on them. And in episode 6 there is a situation where he fights against a female knight, and they basically make a wager on the battlefield that if she wins she can kill him, and if he wins, well, I'll let you imagine what you want to imagine there, because whatever you imagine, that's probably what went down. And yeah, that's going to make some people really uncomfortable. And that's totally understandable, because for some people that is a real thing. And I can 100% empathize with that. So since it's so far in, I want to make sure somebody knows that it's there. So somebody isn't just going along and watching the show, minding their own business, and then suddenly just gets whacked with this. Now, I will say, neither of those situations that I'm talking about are depicted graphically. They are both implied with Fade to Black. There are a few other minor sensual or sexual sequences within the story, and those are often depicted more humorously or in a more silly way. And they're often like started with the idea that, hey, something's going to go on, and then, much like the other two I talked about, they fade. So you'll have to decide for yourself whether that is something you can work with or whether that's not going to work for you. But overall, Remonster is one of the series I enjoyed most this season. I really loved Gobro as a character. I found him incredibly unique and refreshing. I really loved the overall concept of world building, gaining and adding skills, and the way that the overall encampment that the goblins had actually moved and improved and shifted as things went on and as different people joined, and the various social and political alliances that they made along the way. There's also some very heartfelt and warm family stuff that happens as the story goes on, and I found that absolutely heartwarming. With all of that said, I am proud to give Remonster 5 out of 5 flowers, and again, one of my highest recommendations, because I absolutely loved it, and I think that there are going to be a lot of people who could seriously enjoy it too. And finally, coming in at number 1, and I'm sure most of you know what this is going to be before I even say it, we have an Archdemon's Dilemma, How to Love Your Elf Bride, which was my prediction as to what I thought was going to be my favorite show of the season. And not only did it meet my every hope and expectation, It exceeded them in so many ways. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to cover them all here, but holy crap, this was an absolutely amazing show that I enjoyed every second of. So, what is an Archdemon's Dilemma about, you might wonder? Well, an Archdemon's Dilemma is the story of Zagan, a sorcerer who happens to have social anxiety disorder. One day, he and his friend Barbados go to an auction where items from this ancient Archdemon are being auctioned off because he has passed away after 1,000 years. When they get to the auction and they are sitting there and waiting, finally the major item for sale goes up for bids, and it turns out to be a white-haired female elf. The moment that Zagan sees her, he falls instantly, hopelessly in love, and he purchases her without a second thought. But there's just one problem, of course. Buying the girl is going to be infinitely easier for Zagan than talking to her will ever be. Can Zagan find a way to win her heart? Or is he going to have wasted all of that money for absolutely nothing? I love this premise. It's just so goddamn cute. But it obviously, from word go, has a big fat warning for some people because there is definitely slavery in this story. Now, what I will tell you is that outside of a couple instances where Zagan actually critiques his own behavior or others' behavior toward Nephi, that's the elf, over mistakenly speaking to her as though she's an object, generally speaking, it's never used in a negative way. Anytime we see the concept of slavery regarding Nephi used, it's always used to actually advance her character or to showcase an aspect of Zagan's character. That said, I 100% understand that the concept of slavery in storytelling, for some people, for a variety of reasons, is an absolute no-go. So I want to make sure that it's out of the way and out in the open that that is a thing here, so that nobody goes into this and ends up being deeply or traumatically disappointed. Now that we've done that, what makes an Archdemon's Dilemma so special and so worthy of being my number one choice for the season? Well, first off, we have the characters. Every character here is incredible. We have the main couple of Zagan and Nephi, who are both absolutely wonderful in their own way. Zagan is, as I explained in the description, a person who has social anxiety disorder, who has a lot of trouble dealing with people, talking to people. He is just genuinely bad at this because he hasn't really had a lot of human interactions in his life, and he hasn't really had to deal with speaking to people or dealing with people. He dealt with a lot of his own trauma and problems as a young man, and although he's incredibly powerful now, he does not have the capacity for speech and social interaction to match his magical prowess. Period. Fortunately for everyone involved, Zagan is actually a really good and kind and decent person. It's not that he hates people or holds any true malice. It's that he just hasn't had the time or the experience or the situations to actually have that kind of skill to be improved. And also, because he is so damn powerful and he's worked so hard, unknown to him, he terrifies people and they want to run the fuck away. So, the great thing about it is that then we have Nephi. And Nephi is incredible because Nephi has had this really difficult life. She has spent most of her life as a slave. She was shunned and abused by her own people before that even happened. Nephi has never had anyone who has ever cared about her before. But we get to see that change dramatically as this story progresses. Whether it is through her interactions with Zagan, which are lovely, and which range from being very timid and very cautious and almost like suicidally pessimistic initially, but done in a comedic way, to be clear. We actually see her go from that to becoming a more warm and open and happy person. And I really feel that these two characters bring each other to life in a way that I rarely see with other characters, and I was very, very impressed with how they handle that. And the show would be a really good show, even if the two major characters were the only real draw, but that's not the case. Every character that is major to this show is incredible. Manuela, the winged shopkeeper, is hilarious. Raphael, the angelic knight, who seems like a menacing terror, has so much more to him than you would ever imagine. Valefor, or 4, as she's known. The adorable little dragon child is just too precious for words and must be protected at all costs. And then, of course, we have my favorite pair, which are Chastel, the angelic knight, who is kind of clumsy and cutesy and hopeless, and she's just great. And my favorite, of course, is Zagan's best friend, the sorcerer Barbados, who is every bit as morally unscrupulous as Zagan is a good and kind and decent person. And yet, that isn't quite all he is. There is so much more to him that meets the eye. And I just really love that, because every character here, every character I've talked about, has at least one really, really good quality and one kind of questionable or sketchy quality. Because this story is cute and warm and wholesome and fluffy and amazing and everything you would want and is good and right in the world, but it's set in this strange, dark fantasy setting where really, really bad things are happening, even though there's this warm, fluffy cushion at the center of it. And it's just such an incredible contrast. I constantly found myself in awe at how they balanced those two things. Anyway, I'm trying to tell you just how incredible this is and how much you need to watch it without spoiling the entire plot for you or something. So I'm gonna stop here, but what I will tell you is this: An Archdemon's Dilemma, How to Love Your Elf Bride, instantly and gladly gets my highest of high recommendations with 5 flowers, and as well as being the first recipient on my channel of the Cat's Meow Award for amazing storytelling. I cannot recommend this show to you highly enough. If you like fantasy, if you like romance, if you like a sprinkle of comedy, and if you like all of that mixed up in this really intriguing and beautifully built, dark and mysterious world, you absolutely have to give this a go, because it is unique, it is special, it is memorable, and it is absolutely not to be missed. Anyway, that sums up everything I wanted to talk about for my top 5 shows of spring 2024. Again, if you haven't dropped a comment below letting me know what you love this season, please take a moment to do that, because I want to know what people loved. There's very high possibility there are things that I have missed, or there are aspects of things that I may not have seen. And we get those opportunities to learn that kind of stuff by sharing with each other. At any rate, I will talk to you guys in the next video, and I will see you later. Bye!